So who doesn't really love a great RPG? I always love to dabble, once in a while when I know I have the time. That's why I love Persona 5 so much. But I thought this is actually a great opportunity for me to talk to you guys about one of the more recognizable RPGs of back in the older days. And that's actually called Lunar, the Silver Stars Story. This is actually the complete version, but of course since this is a port versus port, we're going to be looking at both the PS1, the Sega Saturn, the Sega CD, the Game Boy Advance, and the PSP. I don't think I'm going to be looking at the PC or iOS version, but mostly all the most accessible versions that you can get, that's what I'm going to be looking at today. So I think you guys need to sit back and see why Lunar is a great RPG to actually play, and maybe see which version might suit for you. I know this is going to be a long video. This took me quite a bit to make, but I think this is something you guys need to see and something you will love to enjoy, especially for the RPG enthusiast. So let's get into Lunar for port versus port. One of the most incredibly beloved RPGs of our time. This is Lunar, or as they say in Japanese, Runa. Silver Star Story for both the Sega CD, the PS1. It's on a multiple array of consoles, and that's what we're going to be actually looking off today. We're going to be looking at the synopsis of what Lunar is. We're going to be going into a little bit of its detail, what it actually is, and then from there, we're going to start exploring into the ports. What made Lunar so interesting was its CD quality of music. Not many titles actually did that back in the day, and what Working Designs wanted to do was to bring a premium RPG with the best quality possible at the time. Featuring voice acting and incredible FMVs, this was truly a title that really was beloved by so many people, not because of its story, but because of what it really brought to the table at the time. Animated and directed by Toshiyuki Kuboka. Also, if you guys love Berserk, it's directed by the Berserk director who did the Golden Age arc. We actually start with our MC Alex and Null, which is pretty much a classic coming of age story. Alex has a role model named Dragon Master Dine who was able to fight against evil and protect the goddess Althena. Of course, we don't really know what happened to Dine except knowing that he actually passed away. Alex sets out to become the best he can be and to really become just like Dragon Master Dine. Of course, we do have many different characters such as Luna and Ramus who are actually thrown into the mix with the great assorted amount of characters. It is actually a 2D oriented game with RPG elements that you would actually expect from titles such as Final Fantasy. With enemies actually roaming around similar to the style of Chrono Trigger, you fight them in sequential order in the similar style to Final Fantasy, with a little bit of turn-based action in between. It's actually a really nice and easy system to get a hold of, but it actually gets a little bit more complex as he actually goes by. And like this style, you actually go in an overworld setting, fight different monsters, go to different dungeons and such of the like. It is very narrative heavy, so if you guys aren't interested in that, this might not be your cup of tea. However, for most people, including myself, Lunar is an incredible title, and a legendary one at that. It also has a great story that really does tie up at the end of the game, so it really does have a beginning, middle, and end, and it really does set off rather nicely. So the good thing is you guys know that you're going to be getting a complete package. Music is also composed by Noriyuki Iwadare, Hiroshi Fujioka, Isao Mizoguchi, Yoshiaki Kubodera, creating a very CD quality-like atmosphere that wasn't really done too much at the time for RPGs. Of course, this was actually updated a little bit later for the PS1, so we're going to actually go into that as well. The cool thing that you guys like to know that it actually does feature pretty prominent voice actors in the Japanese title, such as Akira Ishida, and if you guys don't know, he's actually the voice of Byakuya from Danganronpa and Garo from Naruto. So it's really cool to see that there were actually really great prominent voice actors in the Japanese version. However, the American one is a little bit more cumbersome at that. It actually brought quite a bit of working design employees to actually voice some of the characters for Galleon and Alex and those kind of characters actually. So overall, you guys are going to be getting a fantastic title and a great experience at that. Lunar really is a legendary title at what it does and everything that it is, but the question is, what kind of port is actually going to be worth getting? So there we go, you guys know a little bit more about what Lunar Silver Star Story is, but I do have kind of a bit of a problem. There's a lot of ports for me to actually cover. I don't know if I could do it both articulately and informationally. So I asked one of the good homies here, I know he's a huge fan of the Lunar series, especially the first one, FightClubHubbs. He's gonna actually be helping me out today. So Hubsy, how are you? Please help me.
Alright, and how can I help you? In a non-sexual way.
Oh, really? Well, you're the biggest Lunar fan that I know, so tell me why you like Lunar, and tell everyone else why they should play Lunar.
The Lunar franchise is probably one of my favorite classic RPG franchises back in the 16-bit and 32-bit era. It captivated so many amazing things that I liked. Like, it had a great story, some relatable, strong character development from every single person in the cast. I enjoyed the combat because even though it was turn-based, it had its own spin and flair to it with the way you can actually, you know, have a character move a certain number of steps in order to reach their enemy and attack them. And it kind of plays, you know, a strategy element to that because of positioning and whatnot. And you can see other games later in the 90s actually try and do certain types of, you know, takes on that, like the Grandia franchise and Skies of Arcadia on the Dreamcast.
So not only is Hubbs quite knowledgeable, he can actually help me out. So we're going to start out with the basics. We're going to start out with the first title that came out for Lunar, and that's the Sega CD version. Alright, the first of many ports that we are definitely going to be talking about. This is Lunar Silver Star Story. We're going to be looking at the Sega CD version right now. It is both developed and published by Game Arts in 1992 and June 25th in Japan, and then later released by Working Designs in the US the same year in December 1st. The game at launch pretty much is how I mentioned before. It was pretty much a cinematic RPG that was actually new at the time to have these new beautiful animations, and this title actually does have those really great 2D sprite animations that I'm going to show you here, and it looks absolutely astounding compared to the anime, which does have its own aesthetics that I do love as well. The game pretty much is the base version of everything you're going to see here. Pretty much environments are rather barren. The RPG elements can be a little bit barren as well, but at the same time, what do you really expect? This is a first iteration of the series. If anything, I really like this title in itself because this is actually the first of many to come, so you get to see the origins and how the developers actually wanted to create Silver Star into something more in later iterations. Pretty much, as you can tell, sound effects as well as music is a little bit harkened down as you would usually expect. However, quality still is great. You still get that CD great quality, but sound effects still have that Sega Genesis feel to it, so keep that in mind if you are playing Silver Star. Other than that, honestly, if you really do play this title, it is really a great version of Silver Star to play, but of course, everyone is going to be looking at this version and the other versions as well. So let's fast forward 4 years later into 1996, into the Japanese version of Silver Star Story. We're going to be jumping into the Sega Saturn version.
There was actually two versions that released for the system. There was just the standard version of the game that came out, and then several months later they had an MPEG edition that came out that required the use of the VCD MPEG card that you can plug into the back slot of the console itself, which allows for, you know, full screen, higher quality video playback. If you don't have that, you can't play the second version whatsoever.
Unfortunately, could not really get actual video because we do not have the MPEG card, so I do apologize. However, they are supposed to look crisper and they are supposed to look a little better than you would actually remember. So like I mentioned, this is actually the Japanese version, and this has an incredible jump to Silver Star Story. Almost everything has been redone with new textures, new sprites, new characters, everything. The story also has been a little bit more expanded, and this is the version that most people are actually going to be recognizing. On top of that, we also have brand new FMVs that of course we all know from the PS1, but this is actually the first time we've actually seen this in the Lunar series. So this is actually very new. It's in a very beautiful anime style to kind of go away from the 2D animation we have from the Sega CD version. Of course, while the other version does have voice acting, this one actually has only the Japanese voice acting, but we do have the prominent anime characters and anime voice actors that we do, such as Akira Ishido, who I mentioned did a couple other characters previously.
あの人もこんな風に遠い世界を夢見て旅立ったんだろうか。
The music has actually been quite enhanced, with more than 100 brand new tracks thrown in, and the gameplay has almost been entirely overhauled and looks a lot sleeker, faster, and better. Sound effects have also been redone. Everything just pretty much feels like a more quality title as we would actually expect. The backgrounds are also more detailed, the music is a little chippier, the characters are a little brighter, and this time we also have Alex talking and speaking a bit more compared to his Sega CD counterpart, where he pretty much is more of a silent protagonist. So I think overall, it seems that Working Designs really wanted to expand Silver Star's story and make it a little bit more of a better title, and it clearly shows when you guys actually play this. This is pretty much the version that everyone more or less has played, but it is actually beautiful. And a side note for you Japanese speakers, this does have a combination of hiragana, katakana, and kanji. So if you do want to play this game, it isn't as hard as you really think it is. Do know that some of the kanji is a little bit more complex to understand. However, for me, I'm actually starting to learn Japanese. The hiragana and katakana aren't too bad to understand. Kanji is actually where it actually stumps me, but for me, I could actually play through the game and slowly understand it, so it isn't too bad. I'm pretty sure for experienced Japanese players, this would actually go a whole long way, but I'm pretty sure you guys would love that little tidbit as well.
The Sega Saturn version, in many aspects, is kind of the superior version of the 32-bit games that were developed. And there's a lot of reasons that factor into that. It was the first one that was developed out of the 32-bit games. Now, the Saturn version overall has better quality graphics. I mean, even though it's hard to notice at first, but you do notice it. It has more frames of animation when it comes to certain games or certain elements like the combat. It also has more parallax scrolling layers, which you can definitely notice if you're walking around, let's say, the woods at the very beginning of the game, or the cave at the very beginning of the game as well. For some reason too, I don't know if it's just me, but the music sounds slightly better in the Saturn version as well. Now, I don't know why that is, but to me, it's just how it comes across. The problem that came up was when Bernie Stolar left Sony and was in charge of Sega of America. And he had this problem where he had a policy of no RPGs because he feels like they were too niche, they weren't really system sellers, and he just didn't get them. So right away, he already clashed with, one of the classic Sega backing publishers, Working Designs. One of the issues that arose was the fact that he didn't really want RPGs on the system, and that's kind of like a thing that helps a system in the long run. It was helping the Saturn in Japan exponentially. So he kind of ruined whatever friendship or working relationship that he had with Sega had with Working Designs, and they eventually left. The company that developed Lunar, Silver Star Story Complete, started working and finished their version for the PlayStation.
And now we actually come a couple years later, let's say about 5. The PS1 version has now launched on May 28th, 1998 in Japan, and somehow a full year later, in the exact same date, May 28th, 1999. Of course, this is an actual port of the Sega Saturn version, so more or less, if you guys see the Sega Saturn version, it's pretty much the same thing that we've gotten in the States, aside from, reworked textures, higher quality backgrounds, and all of that jazz. The music, of course, has been slightly more revamped. It is a little bit more crisper. When you guys look at the comparison at the end of the video, you're going to see exactly what each version is going to put. So keep that in mind when we're going to actually go through that. You're going to see the different versions. But of course, featuring 24 more voice actors, the same voice actors who did the Sega CD version have returned for the Working Designs. They're pretty much all Working Designs employees, and they have returned to reprise their voices. Besides everything that I've actually noted in the Sega Saturn version, you're pretty much going to get the same experience that you got in the PS1 version. So this is actually the most accessible for most people. You're going to be getting the most general enhancements aside from, an actual English translation and a few other things as well. Of course, expect the cheesy voice acting. While I do actually prefer the Japanese voice acting just because it is a little bit more professional, it does have some charm in the 90s. And I think it shouldn't go without saying, the PS1 version is also very notable for it being a collector's edition. So inside you do get a couple things such as a map and a little bit of a strategy guide, so it allows you to actually just look at the game, lets you go through the first section of the game. It's a cool little tidbit, and I think a lot of people should know about this when they're going for Lunar. I think everyone knows, but it's a nice little tidbit. So look, what a lot of people don't know, and this is actually what I do, you can technically play the physical copy on your PS3, transfer the save data to your PSP, and play that on that version and then switch in between. I actually do this with a lot of PS1 versions, but it really does come in handy, and I think it's actually a cool little tidbit that I think people would know. So technically you can get a portable version of this, but now there are 2 other portable titles that we're going to get into. And one of them is probably the most drastic revision out of all of them. Yeah, this is gonna be an interesting one, because compared to all the others, it is not only drastic in design, but in what can it actually do. So it was released by Ubisoft in December 10th of 2002, and this is pretty much the story of the little engine that could. Just try imagining fitting a CD inside of a cartridge, and let alone a Game Boy cartridge. And yeah, it's interesting to say the least. So of course, due to cartridge limitation, you know exactly what's going to come in. FMVs are going to be scrapped. Music is going to be at a pretty low quality. We're not going to be getting the same backgrounds that we got in the Sega CD version, as well as the Saturn and PS1. If anything, this is a whole entirely new beast in itself. Well, I do have to say it does reuse some of the images from the FMVs that you could see when some of the characters are introduced. It does have a brand new viewpoint, which is rather chibi in design, so if you're into that, this might be something you want to look into. Of course, this game does take liberties in the story and design, as you can see that Nash comes in very early in the game when he's supposed to come in at least 5 hours later. But anyway, this game is rather odd in design. I will say that the larger character sprites do look a little nicer compared to the smaller ones that we do expect, so I do think that does have it going for it. But if you want a very drastically different perspective on something that you've probably already played, this is something maybe you want to venture into. It's rather interesting in that design.
Some of the things that Rico have touched on, that there was, limitations in regards to the size of the Game Boy Advance cartridges, and with that, it pretty much hurt the game graphically. So not only do you have less frames of animation, you have artwork where everything is condensed down and they're forced to look more chibi-like as opposed to they did in previous games. Especially with the enemies, they don't look as amazing detail-wise because they're smaller, more condensed. Some of the other issues I have with the game, which are some major changes, was like the overworld map now is more of a point-to-point map grid system as opposed to like where the Saturn and PlayStation version you actually walked around on an overworld map with no random encounters, or like the Sega CD version, Mega CD version, where you can actually walk around on the overmap and get into random enemy encounters. Other issues was that the audio just didn't sound that great whatsoever. It was really something that just, didn't really click with me. It was very unmemorable. And the game was incredibly short. I believe it was something that I could beat in under 20 hours. So it was really a pocket-sized version of Lunar in a nutshell. Not really something I would recommend playing.
And lastly, we have the PSP version. This is Lunar Silver Star Story Harmony. This is actually a new one from practically the ground up. It does use some things from the PS1 version, but it's rather crazy. I just started actually playing this, and it's something I didn't think was going to be that cool. So this was released in Japan in November 12th of 2009, later released in the States in March 2nd of 2010, and pretty much this is a whole new everything. New voice actors, new animations, new character sprites, new everything. If anything, even a new isometric perspective. A new battle system as well, which is actually a little bit more refined and easier to use than ever. I do love that the game is rather faithful to the FMVs of previous days, and it does actually have a slightly nicer quality than you can see from the PS1 version. We're going to show that in the comparison a little bit later, so stay tuned for that. But to get back onto this actually does bring a lot of new things to the table, and including a new expanded story. When you actually start up the game, you have a brand new epilogue, which is definitely not in the PS1, Sega Saturn, Sega CD version. You already go into the perspective of Alex, but this one you're already into Dragon Master Dine, protecting Goddess Althena, and you'll see that in the battle below, which is crazy. You also do have new voice actors, which are pretty recognizable, such as Yuri Lowenthal. So you could already know that Xseed actually hired a couple great voice actors. So you're going to be getting something truly great. You can actually tell that this game was actually taken with love and care, and they actually took the original Lunar game and slightly expanded it. So if you already played something and you already played Lunar 1, this is a really fresh take on playing it again in a new perspective and even new stories. So I think this is something fantastic that a lot of people will enjoy as well. I don't want to expand too much on the PSP version, however, I think a lot of people would love that I actually threw it in. Maybe I'll expand on this a little bit later, but this is pretty much all that you'll have to see for all the ports. So now, of course, we're going to go into the comparison of the game, and this is where you guys are going to absolutely love. We're going to start from the Sega CD, move our way upward, and you guys are going to see the different perspectives one by one, and you're going to see what you like. So take a little gander, sit back, and enjoy the show.
When all the land is peaceful and there is no further to us at last, then comes a time for love, two hearts colliding into one great hymn.
遠くへ地平線の彼方まで風が忘れた
On wings of hope, each of our souls intertwine when we do. Instantly we beckons to us with cheerful tidings and open arms. So now our journey begins, bound for a new world.
Oh,
いつか僕も行くのだろうか。あの雲の流れる果てを目指して、僕自身の冒険の旅へと。
Hey, Alex! I figured you might be here. Now that the warm weather has melted the ice near the Dragon's Cave, there isn't any time to waste getting started on our big adventure. If we hurry, we may be able to sneak in without waking the dragon.
This could be our big chance! I bet we have a shot at getting one of those legendary dragon diamonds, like the ones we've been hearing about in the tales of the Dragon Masters!
So thanks to Hubsy Wubsy, we actually got a little bit more info about the Lunar series, and I didn't even think about goddamn Bernie Solar. But the question is, what is the port that you guys think that you should play? Of course, this is going to be a little bit subjective from person to person and title to title. However, for my personal recommendation, I would actually go for the Sega Saturn, believe it or not. Not only is it pretty cheap to actually get a copy of, it's actually pretty cool to actually play through a game that has both hiragana, katakana, and kanji. It has pretty much the same things as the PS1 title with a fraction of the price, and it has Japanese voice acting, and it actually sounds rather cool. I think Hubs actually kind of sold me on this. But Hubsy, what is your favorite one that you need to recommend to everyone?
Okay, well, for me, I would have to say my favorite version of Lunar Silver Star would have to be the Sega CD version. It may be the nostalgia goggles, but for whatever reason, the Sega CD version just has this charm to it that will never go away. I enjoyed the game immensely. For whatever reason, there was just something that was lost in translation when Game Arts decided to make the Saturn and PlayStation version. I don't know if it was just Working Design's sense of humor that they were trying to update to keep going with the times, because if you read the contents of their jokes or their dialogue, you can definitely tell that they're dated. And even all the extra graphical enhancements, the FMV cutscenes or whatever, it's nice, it's impressive, but it doesn't win me over. It doesn't have the charm that the Sega CD version has. That is why it's still, to me, to this day, my favorite version, the best version of all ports of Lunar Silver Star story.
So Hubsy, where can actually people find you so they can know about you forever and ever?
You can find me in hell after dying from one of Lance's screams.
I managed to get a couple of other Shadow Lanterns for Pazzo.
You can find me easily on Twitter under @FightClubHubbs. You can watch me stream on Twitch as twitch.tv/thegvn, one word. You can check out my channel on YouTube, which is where I archive all my streams, and whenever I make a video or two, it'll go there at FightClubHubbs, which is my channel name. And if you want to check out my website, it's gamingvisionnetwork.com. There you go. That's me in a nutshell.
So I want to thank Fight Club Hubs. Thank you so much for actually coming in. He actually was an incredible help. And thank you, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here, Rico.
Seriously, thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Oh, stop it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Bye.
Bye, motherfucker.